Okay, this week, we're going to go up the social complexity scale a little bit from families and communities and look at states and I was not particularly looking forward to this chapter because I figured it would be the same old boring tribes and states sort of thing, but actually it's quite an enlightening chapter in that it not only discusses the elements of how humans in the last 10,000 years have evolved from being a species of tribes to a species of global dominating complex societies. And in parallel with that, we have our 200 years of anthropological study, and one of the things that they want to talk about is how over that 200-year period, not only have societies evolved from being basically locally dominated societies to being globalized societies, but anthropology itself has increased its scope and made some critical changes in how it looks. And the basis of this evolution of anthropology, cultural anthropology, is that when anthropology started back in the 1900s, back in the 1800s, basically it was a case that European civilization was very ethnocentric and very race-oriented, and then in those 200 years, not only anthropology, but I think probably anthropology taking the lead of all of the many other disciplines in the society in general, have basically turned away from a philosophy of separation of peoples to a philosophy of trying to understand the unification of people, of the human species. And this is all very complicated and interesting, and to the point that I've probably listened to the chapter 5 times and read it a couple of times and puzzled over its very complex implications. But I think that probably the most helpful thing is to think about how the anthropologists started out with this race idea, which is really a way of dividing up humans into local and ultimately continental scale divisions, to looking at how humans are all of one species, and it's sort of like getting back to the way we were 10,000 years ago, because 10,000 years ago, well, 50,000 years ago, the people that are in the world today were all one group of people probably in East Africa, and then they started spreading out from there and diversifying into very different continental scale environments, and so you get some of the distinctions that you can see now. But 50,000 years doesn't turn out to be enough to really separate a species into anything that can be considered certainly not a separate species, and in fact not even very much distinguishable subgroups, those subgroups ranging from all over the world still have very similar underlying customs. All humans speak language. All humans have this and that and the other thing. All humans are dependent on fire for cooking. All humans have understandings of how this species, how their environment has to be separated into the usable and unusual. These things that we've been going over, all those things are underlying indications of how humans are still basically humans. And even looking at the genetics, the findings pretty much point to all the variation in all human groups from all continents account for about 85% of the diversity in humans, and there's only about 15% of what goes on in in the human condition separates us into slightly different subgroups. So it's a very interesting chapter, and so do your readings carefully this week.